Well, I have some legal questions for you, but maybe we should start, and since we have a
Okay,
small group, we could keep it.
okay. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to City Lit's virtual event with Lee Vandervoo, author of As the World Burns, New Generation of Activists and the Landmark Legal Fight Against Climate Change, in conversation with Alex Loznak. Lee is an award-winning investigative and environmental journalist. Her work has appeared in Reuters, New York Times, The Guardian, and others. Her reporting has been supported by significant awards and fellowships, including the Logan Fellowship, an Investigative Reporters and Editors Award, and the Lizzie Grossman Grant for Environmental Health Reporting. Her 2016 book, The Fish Market, chronicles the gentrification of the sea in the name of sustainable seafood. It won an Oregon Book Award for general nonfiction. She is deeply involved in nonprofit journalism, formerly working as the managing director of the nonprofit journalism studio Investigate West. Alex is a graduate of Columbia University and is now first year law school. He started a climate change club at Roseburg High School, started the League of Umpqua Climate Youth, and has lobbied his state legislators to pass comprehensive climate legislation. He has now also conducted extensive research for this lawsuit, including uncovering President John F. Kennedy's knowledge of human-caused climate change. So great to have both of you here. For everyone that's attending, you can please open your chat and write questions in the chat, and we'll get to those later. And I will turn it over to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for Alex for joining me. We're a small group, so if folks feel like, they want to turn their cameras on and jump in, feel free. I'm very comfortable with that. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my book, which is to tell you a little bit about Alex and his case. Alex is one of 21 plaintiffs who filed litigation against the federal government in 2015, basically charging that by perpetuating a fossil fuel energy system through subsidies, through authorization of energy, and through permits, the U.S. government is violating Alex and his co-plaintiffs and future generations' constitutional right to a stable climate, or essentially through life, property, and liberty. Do I have that right, Alex?
That's right. Yeah, life, liberty, and property.
Life, liberty, and property.
Yeah.
And so this is a case that started in 2015. How old were you at that time, Alex?
18. Yeah, about to go off to college.
So the age range between the plaintiffs was, the youngest was 8 years old. The oldest at the time was 19 years old. And these were young people from all over the United States. About half were from Oregon. There's plaintiffs from Alaska litigating their loss of their Arctic lifestyle. There are plaintiffs from low-lying shoreside areas litigating sea level rise. So a very diverse group of claims. But when I heard about it, I admit this, that I heard about it as a reporter because I'm based in Portland, Oregon. I was getting a lot of press releases at the time about the case, and I just thought, this can't be for real. And I think a lot of people kind of had this initial reaction like, okay, we have 21 kids suing the federal government. Are they being managed by their parents? Are they props to like a legal nonprofit? Like, I had these questions. I think a lot of people had these questions initially. But then as the case gained ground, it became very clear that it was a serious case. And the more serious it got, the more intrigued I got by it. And I thought, I have to meet these people. And I have to know what the stories are that brought them to this. So I started covering this in 2018, thinking that it was about to be the most important trial, one of the most important trials in America. And I now think of it as the most important trial that hasn't happened yet in America. Alex's trial was canceled in 2018. We'll talk a little bit about the whys of that. But I started following the plaintiffs initially to cover their trial experience and ended up along for the ride for the next year or so. So my book, As the World Burns, is about that. And going to ask Alex to tell you all a little bit about his claims in the litigation.
For sure. Well, what I'll say is a lot of people my age might have girl problems or boy problems. Myself and the other plaintiffs have had Supreme Court problems where, this case, as Lee mentioned, was supposed to go to trial in October of 2018, which, is almost 2 years ago now. And we were, I believe, 5 or 6 business days from the start of trial. The U.S. government filed a last-ditch petition to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Roberts issued a stay that lasted beyond the scheduled start date of the trial, and then the Supreme Court ended up hearing arguments, and it sent it back to the Court of Appeals, and it's been caught up in appeal for basically the last 2 years, and still is. Lee summarized the claims, I think, pretty well. We have 21 plaintiffs from across the U.S., including myself, who've been impacted by climate change in numerous different ways. For me personally, I grew up on the family farm here in Oregon, but there are also young people who have ancestors and family in the Pacific Islands that are sinking under the sea because of climate change. There's my friend Nathan, who lives in Alaska, which is on the front line because it's warming faster in the far northern reaches of the globe than it is closer down toward the equator. And what we argue is that the government, through its affirmative systemic policies that exacerbate climate change, so subsidizing fossil fuels, providing permits for fossil fuel development, et cetera, they are violating our rights to life, liberty, and property under the Constitution, and specifically the right to due process. Way back when the Bill of Rights was written in the late 1700s, one of the things they were concerned about was the government's ability to, take away people's rights, whether it be, summary execution or seizure of people's property, etc. And they said you have to have due process before the government can do that. And it's been a long time since that was written, and maybe the framers didn't necessarily have climate change in mind, although maybe they did. And there are some interesting documents there saying, Thomas Jefferson was already starting to study and think about climate change in a little bit different way. But when we look at the facts today, the way that the government is perpetuating and exacerbating climate change really constitutes a fundamental due process violation against all Americans, but particularly against young people and future generations.
Yeah, indeed. And so your particular claims are to do with your farm, right?
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about
That's
that.
right. So, sure. So we've got a little piece of Oregon history here. My great grandmother, so my grandmother's great grandmother, crossed the Oregon Trail, and she actually became one of the very first women to own property in the state of Oregon. Of course, she was not one of the first women in the state of Oregon because indigenous people had been here for a long time, but one of the first women to come across the Oregon Trail and own a plot of land. And ever since then, we have our family, a particular branch of the family tree, has been here growing crops. Very early on, it was hops. More recently, prunes were a big cash crop. People used to eat a lot of prunes, and they don't eat them so much anymore. But we're trying to go into hazelnuts now, and it is a very specific microclimate here that supports hazelnut growing. Oregon actually is where about 99% of the U.S. hazelnut crop is produced. So they don't grow them at scale in Washington. They don't grow them at scale in California. But as the climate regime is starting to shift, we're starting to, excuse me, encounter drought and excessive heat, which is really disrupting that hazelnut crop. And we had a record-breaking wildfire season that I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more.
Yeah, and so, wildfire being one of the threats that we're dealing with more so in the West, you've had a pretty unique kind of front row seat for that. Uh, tell us a little bit about this season. I mean, it was a record breaking season when you filed, but now 2020, this is the record breaker, and maybe we'll keep setting records, I guess. But we've had 3 million acres burn out west, and California's had its first what they call gigafire, which is more than 1 million acres burned in a single fire, which is it's kind of incredible. Um, what was your experience like on your farm through this?
It was hellacious. I mean, we had more acres burn in Oregon over a uh, basically a weekend, maybe a week in total, than we usually have burn in a whole year. So this is unprecedented in modern times. It may never have been this severe before, and I suspect it has never been this severe before. And the sky turned orange across the state. In fact, in some places I saw pictures. I wasn't that way here. The sky turned blood red. The sky turned blood red, and there were pictures of uh, houses and cars, and everything is just blood red. But we had locally the Archie Creek fire, which burned up in the Cascade Mountains. It's an area that I used to go camping often as a kid, and that's gone now. But the ashes from that fire rained down, and it was almost like it had snowed. I looked at the car, and it was covered in ash. And at first, it looks like snow, but when you scoop up a little bit on your finger and you look at it, it's little bits of pine needles and tree bark, and you can kind of identify what it was, what it used to be. And the fear was that it would have started a fire here, very locally where our home is. And fortunately, we were spared that, unlike so many others who actually did see their homes destroyed by this and were displaced.
Yeah, and a couple of whole communities burned, and people were displaced sort of permanently from there, and also up here to the north. So I'm 4 hours north of Alex. We had air quality so severe that I have towels on my windows here to keep the smoke from coming in the house. So this is, another set of fires that was 12 miles to the east of me, and it was a trifecta of fires that merged together and became really, really dangerous and really close to largely populated urban areas. So this stuff is very scary, and it's core to what the youth of Alex's generation and he and his co-plaintiffs claim is that they would like remedies before this becomes the world that they live in, that they have to consider raising their children in. And for me on this journey, kind of learning their perspective about these issues as opposed to someone my age for whom it's always in the future. We're always going to go back to normal, whatever normal is. Um, Understanding that this is the world that they have expected and have tried to prevent and are actively trying to prevent and find remedies for is really kind of a very shocking perspective for me, because I always understood climate change. This is very sad saying this as an environmental journalist, but as something that could be remedied through individual action, simple choices at the cash register was all going to be better. I think people of my generation have been really pushed toward that by our government and also our consumer systems, that this isn't really a problem so long as we just make the best choices. I think now we know hopefully everyone understands. I know that's probably a very broad and untrue statement, but we do more broadly understand in America that climate change is a real threat and that we have to make systemic changes to get out of this. But one of the things that has shocked me about this type of coverage, and through the year of watching Alex's and his co-plaintiffs kind of battle the courts for their right to be heard on this issue, I was covering wildfire. I covered the Camp Fire when Paradise burned in California, and I'm covering these fires here for the Guardian retrospective. And one of the things that I've observed that is really freaky, honestly, for me, is to see how much expiring retail outlets are being repurposed into disaster management areas. Places that used to be community places like fairgrounds, community centers. But not just that, but like the Sears and Roebuck or the Toys R Us, like, the cash registers are gone, the stores are empty, and now this is where FEMA comes in to do its work. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book, and I'm going to read these sorts of descriptors just to kind of give you a sense of the writing, and also, the kind of thing we're talking about here in the West being more and more at issue. A little bit of background in the scene. I am headed to report the Camp Fire. On the drive south from Oregon, NPR reports that the burn area around the Camp Fire is bigger than Chicago. Rain is hitting California as a fresh relief, and by the time I arrive, the fire is out. Once I reach Chico, it takes me 2 full days to get a grip on the size of this disaster, which is my job, that and reporting on the recovery. It isn't easy. There are 34,000 evacuees, those from Paradise and Magalia to the north, and other mountain dwellers who are outside city limits. Now, the ones who haven't left the region have combined with rescuers to overrun every hotel within roughly 30 miles of Chico, plus most of the campgrounds. Every apartment or room for rent that can be found in a county with a 2% vacancy rate for rentals has been had. Evacuees have also dried up the market for houses for sale and trailers and RVs too, buying whatever they can drive or tow and park, then live in. The recovery effort is immense, dizzying in its scope. It includes the National Guard, the Red Cross, and FEMA, plus local agencies and charities too numerous to count. The fairgrounds that are used for staging operations and for shelters are spread over 3 towns, each half an hour drive from the next, making even the geography of reporting on it challenging. Command Central for Disaster Response is set up in Chico at a fairground known as the Silver Dollar, where the marquee is still advertising whatever gun or fashion show was the most exciting thing happening here a few weeks ago. The parking lot is awash in official-looking vehicles. There are police cars and fire trucks that look sturdy enough to drive over the moon. Several rugged ambulances are equipped for search and rescue, belonging to the teams from 5 states that have come to help. There is every type of monstrous-looking machine that has utility in a situation where roads have been buried under abandoned cars, downed utility lines, trees, and rubble. These include vehicles from the National Guard, whose canvas and crescent roof pop-ups are assembled in a field outside the fairgrounds gates. From the street, it looks like a set from the film Arrival, a place where one makes contact with another world. And in a way, it is. In the final tally, 153,000 acres around Paradise have burned. The western edge of the scar traces the road that runs from Chico south to Orville, speed limit 60 miles an hour. Still, it takes 7 minutes to drive the border of the burn at that speed. It is that large. Its size is otherworldly, almost incomprehensible, and it extends east from the road as far as the eye can see. When I look at it for the first time, I nearly veer off the road just gawking. People stop, take pictures, try to take in the enormous dimensions of it, but it is impossible. The few strands of grassland and the deep tractor tire marks along the edge are all there is to indicate that this is no freshly plowed field, that what's happened here is a blaze barely contained. In a few places, The fire jumped the highway for a few acres to the west and nearly made a getaway toward more towns. Amazingly, the trees still stand on the ridges that roll toward paradise. For now, the town is officially closed, with 18,744 structures burned, 13,965 of them people's homes. Search and rescue teams are looking for hundreds of people still missing. Twice a week, Butte County officials hold press conferences in the main hall at a fairground called the Harvest Hall, a flat-looking building with a utilitarian floor that can be piled up for folding chairs and TV cameras, and a podium to create some kind of order. By Thanksgiving weekend, it is clear that the people associated with this effort have been working nonstop and are exhausted. Like the press, they rearrange their shifts and duties after the holiday, sending in the reserves, so many people arriving turn out to be people like me, people who have just begun to wander these encampments of crews in imposing uniforms, safety orange and hard hats, trying to get a grip on whatever it is they're supposed to be doing. Officials from Butte County have mostly taken charge of the efforts underway, looking for bodies, figuring out when and where school will resume, taking stock of what buildings still stand, where people will live, cleaning up the debris, and going about the business of restoring utilities, power, phone, water, natural gas. It falls to the county sheriff to oversee the search and rescue and find all the people who are unaccounted for. Just days ago, that number was topping 1,200, but every day it falls through a combination of recovered bones and the desk and shoe leather effort that finds people who are staying with relatives in campgrounds or elsewhere and didn't know that they had yet been reported missing yet. To grasp the number of people still not found is staggering, stultifying, and unsettling. Day by day, the sheriff's reports to the press are followed by a parade of other experts in charge of all the other parts of recovery reporting on their own next steps. Some are shelter officials offering head counts and details on which shelters remain open and where, weathering their own outsized efforts. Not everyone is comfortable with this officialdom. Just down the road is a Walmart parking lot where people resistant to shelters have set up camp. Some are camping in cars and others in tents and tarps that first converted a trapezoid of grass between the store and the highway and has since slowly swelled into a tent city for refugees. By now, Black Friday is over and there are security vehicles, SUVs driven by official-looking sorts whose jobs, it seems, is to cast cool but stinky eyes in the direction of the campers who remain while alternatives are on offer. Norovirus has hit the shelters as hard as it hit Paradise before the fire, and some of the campers say they would rather take their chances with the rain than the germs. Plus, the location of the Walmart is hard to beat. The Walmart, like a lot of Walmarts, is a barge in a sea of pavement surrounded by other barges, Lowe's and Kohl's and the Chico Mall, the parking lots of which also fill up with disaster aftermath. Insurance companies set up mobile claim centers, MCCs for short, in RVs, trailers, even air tents in the parking lots of big box stores, serving hot beverages and cookies to displaced people who turn up to begin dealing with insurance if they have it. Evangelicals, initially with help from the secular set, have taken over a vacant Toys R Us building and are using it as a clearinghouse for supplies, camping gear and bottled water, religion-themed disaster kits and clothes, food, blankets, and gift cards, lots of gift cards. They are calling it Miracle City, but the guy who runs it says it's more like running a grocery store in hell. The staff wear red armbands to distinguish themselves from the survivors whose arms are taped with blue. As I talk with the boss about operations here, a staffer passes carrying a cloth-wrapped container filled with gift cards to the safety of the primary colored checkout counters. A man in a neck brace has been given a table at which to examine people's eyes, then fit them with replacement glasses. FEMA is across the road, set up in the old Sears Anchor store on the east end of the Chico Mall, which has quickly filled with one-stop shopping for the disaster-ravaged. Besides running its own programs, offering shelters and other housing aid, FEMA offers space to donors like St. Vincent de Paul and the Red Cross, along with a lot of other entities. They offer medical equipment, therapy dogs, directed play for traumatized kids, and various loan programs designed to get people and businesses back on their feet. This is where the sheriff's office is collecting DNA from the relatives of the people still missing, and where the state's Vital Records Department is reissuing things like birth certificates to those people who no longer have them. The DMV is there too to make licenses from the vital records, And when the lines get long, the place works just like a DMV. People take numbers and sit in neat rows wearing glazed expressions. Many carry dogs and suitcases, random donations, and water. There is blue tape on the floor to route the ones who can no longer pick up their heads. I kind of go on to say in this section that I had never seen anything like this before. And, I've been a journalist for 20 years, so I've seen a lot of really accidents and disasters and that kind of thing. And what's frightening to me now is that I'm reporting it again right now. I'm reporting on the cleanup and rescue efforts that took place at Clackamas Town Center, which is a mall here in Oregon, outside the Portland suburbs. So um, even even in 2 years, my own perspective of what is normal in terms of my job and disaster coverage has drastically recalibrated to where I now know how to go into a situation like this and do the reporting. And what's really frightening to me about that is I can recall going to my first active shooter incidents, and I didn't know anything about guns, and I didn't know the terminology. And when someone said the shooter was wearing a non-ballistic vest, I didn't know what that meant. I had to ask someone from law enforcement. And we all learned in the media to adapt to this environment, to these terms. And like everyone else, now there's another school shooting, and it's just like, well, all you do is think, hopefully the body count isn't that high. It's like no longer shocking. And after seeing this with 18,000 and some odd structures burned, the vast majority of them people's homes, when I heard that we lost 2 communities here in Oregon, this is a horrible thing to say, but it is true. In my mind, I was immediately thinking, well, it could have been much worse. We only lost, that's only 400 homes. It could have been so much worse. Already my own metric for disaster is recalibrating, and my job is recalibrating, and my colleagues are recalibrating. People talk about what kind of clothing they wear. Now we all have, make sure you have all cotton gear. Make sure you have clothing that when it burns, it's not going to stick to you. It's going to burn right off. I mean, these are the things that we're thinking about as practicalities of working in the West as journalists. And so, to this case, this is the place where it tried to keep us from going, right? And I wonder, Alex, if you find yourself similarly recalibrating your expectations.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's the phrase? I'm forgetting the phrase that I'm thinking of, but we've really created this mess that this didn't come out of nowhere. This is a result of many years, decades of systemic decisions, systemic policy making that it's gotten us to this point. And it does feel like 2020, although these problems are not new, 2020 is really a breaking point and an inflection point of some kind, inflection one way or the other, where we're living in a different world. And I agree with you that these things have become normalized that just a few years ago would have been absolutely shocking, and it's like you turn on the news and every day it's, what major disaster happened today, and it's around climate change, it's around wildfires, but it's also around, what's going on in our political system. And every day is a new insult that, would have been just a jaw dropper in a previous era, and with the coronavirus. And I noticed a few weeks, or a month or maybe a month ago, that the news, the TV news every night had reported on the coronavirus every night for, since the crisis started. But they stopped doing that because it just sort of faded into the background. We assume that when you go outside, when you go somewhere these days, you have to wear a mask, whether it's because of the virus or because of the fires or whatever. And so, it really feels like an apocalyptic year. And I do, and it, I get a bit nervous when I hear people saying, I can't wait to get on to 2021, because it does feel like that's, tempting fate. Uh, hopefully this will be the year that we all sort of, you know, recognize and realize the course that we're on, and, uh, made a serious course correction. And I think it's not too late for, the Juliana case to be a keystone, so to speak, um, or a cornerstone of that course correction, when it comes to climate, but also when it comes to, all of these broader issues, the inequalities in our society that are just becoming deeper and manifesting themselves, in more and more obvious ways every day. So, I try to stay hopeful, and I think we have to get through the next couple months with the election and, confirmation of a new Supreme Court justice. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I did say, to you before that, I hope if we get another president in office, they'll take a bit more, rational approach to this case, because we have had two administrations in a row that just fought tooth and nail to try and get it, dismissed. So, one could hope that maybe the next president would, you know, have discussions with Juliana and with Juliana plaintiffs about, what could be done differently. Um, so, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because I think, there's some nasty surprises probably still left, before we, get out of the woods in terms of getting through this year.
Yeah, well, hopefully we've had enough nasty surprise. In spite of all the the things that you mentioned that risk here, I mean, one of the bright spots is and why I feel like your case is so compelling is it actually is very hopeful, and I find the determination of
Mhm.
you and your co-plaintiffs and many
Yeah,
young activists working on these issues to be totally inspiring. And I think it's kind of to kind of quote your co-plaintiff Shuteska in some of my work. He talked a lot about how when you don't speak to young people, you don't hear the hope and optimism, because not only are they the most effective, but they're also the
yeah,
generation that is least able to look away, right? So you do get a lot of really hopeful
yeah.
context, and I love that about your case and your story.
I wanted to say the phrase I was grasping at a minute ago was, the chickens coming home to roost. Because that is really what it feels like now. I mean, it's not like, it's not like change hasn't been starting to show its effects. It's just that they're really, coming to a head, so to speak, and reaching that inflection point.
Yeah, for sure. Patrick has asked us if we can talk about the plaintiff from Illinois and the issue about Illinois that's raised in litigation. So important context is that in addition to this federal case, there's litigation pending in many different states as well. I'm not that familiar with the Illinois case. Alex, are you?
Not particularly. I don't think that we have a plaintiff in the federal case from Illinois.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Uh, there may be an Illinois state case, but I don't know about it.
Yeah, I think it is a state level case. I'm sorry we
Yeah.
can't answer that one. There was litigation filed in all 50 states initially, and some of
Right.
that is still moving forward. I believe 11 states are still active, and so it's hard to kind of keep track of all these moving parts. And now there's international pieces as well. There's litigation in Mexico and Canada, Portugal, not necessarily led by
Yeah.
Archelaus Strauss. Some of it is affiliated, but there's a lot of youth-led climate cases at this point, and it's hard to know the ins and outs of each of them.
Yeah.
Happy to answer any other questions too if people have them. Um,
how did you gather the support to bring such a substantive case, forward, Alex?
Sure. Well, we have our attorneys to thank here. And, fortunately, although I am a first-year law student, fortunately, I didn't have to do all the legwork to, prepare the case before filing it and research legal claims, et cetera. So there's a group of attorneys who've been working on this for a number of years. It really started with a good friend of mine, Mary Wood, who is a professor of law at the University of Oregon. And the theory that she's put forward is the public trust doctrine, or I should say, the theory that she has applied to climate change is the public trust doctrine, which basically says that certain essential resources belong to the public as a whole, and that the government has a fiduciary duty not to impair those resources. So the classic examples would be rivers. In many states, beaches are a public trust, so individual can't own the beach. But her theory, which really underlies all of our work, is that the atmosphere is as well one of these public trust resources. So government has a duty not to damage it, not to cause substantial impairment to it. And the way that is articulated in our case is through the Constitution and through the individual rights that we have as U.S. citizens that the courts are very used to interpreting and enforcing. And so, we're basing our claims on those rights because they are so familiar, and they're easily, well, I shouldn't say easily, but they are, sitting in the toolbox ready to be applied to a novel situation such as this.
And the litigation is led by Our Children's Trust, which is a legal nonprofit in Eugene, Oregon. So they have this case and several other state level cases. So a lot of the resources for litigating the case come from grants and fundraising. So there's a lot of public support behind this.
Yep. And Lorraine asks, could you talk about where the case is lodged right at this moment? We currently are on a petition for en banc review, which at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So let me rewind a little bit and say we had this big trial date that we were, supposed to go to trial in October. The Supreme Court issued a temporary stay that ended up delaying and ultimately canceling that trial. The Supreme Court, after that, issued a 7-2 decision in our favor, essentially not to dismiss the case outright, but sent it back to the Ninth Circuit, which is our federal appeals court that covers the Western U.S. And I'm simplifying a little bit, but in a nutshell, it asked the Ninth Circuit to hear the case on appeal before trial. And so the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, this panel of 3 judges, heard the case about a year ago. We had a big hearing in Portland, and they decided against us ultimately early this year, maybe in February or March, in a 2-1 decision. So we actually had one judge say, one of these federal appeals judges say, there is a constitutional right to a stable climate, and that the federal courts have the authority and even the duty to intervene and order the U.S. government to take action to abate climate change. So the procedural posture of the case now is that we plaintiffs are seeking review of that decision by the full Ninth Circuit. So if that were to be granted, we would have, I believe, an 11-judge panel review the decision from this March, and that would provide the opportunity or the possibility for the Ninth Circuit to adopt the opinion offered, excuse me, by the dissent and say there is a constitutional right to a stable climate, and the courts can enforce that right. And so, of course, that's what plaintiffs are hoping for. Fingers crossed that there will be an interlocutory appeal granted. I think there's a good chance that we will get it, and if we do, that will take at least a year or two to go through the process. But like I said, of course, we've got an election on the horizon, and it is my hope. Maybe I shouldn't hold my breath, but maybe I should. And my hope would be that the next presidential administration could take a less adversarial stance toward this case. And Biden Harris have put forward a serious climate change plan, and so one could hope that maybe they wouldn't fight the kids who want a science-based national climate plan. But like I said, we'll see. And we have, of course, at least one of the two major candidates for president saying he will not concede. So I think it's going to be a very interesting couple of months, and I don't want to get too far ahead in terms of predicting the far future. But at the moment, the focus is on getting that en banc review by the federal appeals court.
What do you think is the timeline on hearing from the Ninth Circuit about whether the full panel will review the case?
Soon, I think we will. I think we will know soon. They've already decided on a number of petitions, I believe, including some from both before and after ours was filed, and so I think there's a real shot at getting a decision soon. So stay tuned.
And that decision sends you to the full panel, and you think it will take you 2 years to get a review by the full panel?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, the review by the 3-judge panel took about 9 months. So, to go through briefing to oral argument and ultimately to get a decision would take some time.
And that would either send you back to the trial court or to the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah. So if we had a favorable decision from the en banc panel, that would be instantly appealed to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court almost certainly would hear it, just because that would be such a groundbreaking decision. On the other hand, if the Knights, if we were ultimately to get an unfavorable decision from the en banc panel, then the next step to consider would be to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, for plaintiffs to appeal to the Supreme Court.
So Patrick asks us, in addition to the lawsuit, if there's an effort to organize young people across the country to fight for the environment. I feel like I could say a few things about that, but maybe you want to add at it. Yeah, the answer is yes. A lot of established longtime climate groups like 350.org, Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, for example, have youth programs. And so that's kind of been in the works for a long time. Of course, you saw last year before COVID hit, and the year before that, school strikes and Fridays for Future really gearing up. We expected to see those groups, so the groups that were striking from school on Friday, to run very aggressive strike, protest, and boycott campaigns through this last summer and the lead up to the election. And of course, what ended up happening was a pandemic, and now we're all living in a very different world. Climate activists are not particularly visible in that world, but when I talk to people who are very active, young climate activists, what they tell me is that they tucked into labor protest, to support frontline workers and also protest to support BLM and racial equity and justice. So there's a feeling among young activists who are looking for, they are looking for transitions on many fronts of what they see as an inequitable system in America. But what they're also doing is they're coalition building. There's a strong feeling that 2021 is their year, that Biden will win the election, and that 2021 will become the year that the United States has a climate remediation plan. Young activists want to be able to turn out the labor movement and racial justice organizers in support of their cause in equal number. And so that's why you're not hearing like an awful lot of climate activism, young voices right now, is they're not trying to steal the stage. They're just trying to support other activists and other platforms and wait for their time next year.
Absolutely. And City Lit also asks, are you pursuing legislative paths as well? And I think that folds into the same question. And there are a lot of outstanding groups led by young people who are working on this. And the Sunrise Movement, for it comes to mind, and they've been very, very active, and we're able to be very prominent in the presidential election, being name dropped by Senator Bernie Sanders on the debate stage, and they've become something of a kingmaker, I guess you could say, in a pretty short period of time, just a couple of years. So there's definitely many different arms to the movement, both on the judicial side and on the street protest and organizing side, and the legislative side as well. And so I think that's the kind of multi-pronged movement that you need, that will be needed in any major policy area or any major issue where systemic reform is needed, just like in the civil rights movement, for instance, where you had lawyers and plaintiffs bring Brown v. Board of Education, but you also had to have people on the inside in Congress and ultimately be able to pass the Civil Rights Act. So that's what we need. And Matt Avery, I can't see you, but Matt Avery asks, Alex, do you mind sharing how you plan to use your law degree? And it's a few years out, but we need people working on these issues, and not just not exclusively climate change, but definitely climate change is a part of that. But we need really profound systemic reform in many areas of policy and the law. And so, in whatever capacity I can play a role in trying to move the needle on those areas of law, that's what I intend to do. And so, I've certainly learned a lot by being one of the litigants bringing this case, and that's a first step in some regards, and we'll see where I go next, and we'll see where all 21 of the youth go next, because I think there are some really remarkable young people who have brought this case together, and not just these 21, but there are many millions of youth in the U.S. and around the world who are really at the leading edge of this movement, and of many different movements for social justice, for racial justice, and other things that are rising, and that I think are needed, and are maybe the last best hope that we have for any kind of just or sane or stable world coming out of this. So I think we need our sage elders and the right political leadership, but we also need the energy of young people coming in and really powering these movements and powering the transition that we need.
And maybe giving those of us who are older the perspective that you have of what the world looks like if we don't make these changes. I mean, I think one of the tougher things about what we're talking about for solutions is that they take longer than 4 years. They don't have the curb appeal that many people typically run elections on. And so unless you do have these broad coalitions, and I neglected to mention some of these enormous and growing youth-led organizations like Sunrise, like Fridays for Future, like 0 Hour, Earth Guardians. I mean, that people capital is going to be what drives change in the end, because that they're becoming an enormous voting bloc as well. And I think it's become clear that this issue can't be ignored for young voters. Thank you for the book link, City Lit. Do we have other questions? A couple minutes here. Well, happy to answer other things. I mean, I think in conclusion, I would just say it was a really great experience to be able to follow along with these plaintiffs and learn so much about youth perspective on climate change, and also, climate change itself and how urgent it is, and also, what the solutions are, what we can be doing. So happy to be here talking about those things today. Thanks for having us, and thanks, Alex, for joining me.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for having me, and I appreciated coming on, and I'm really hoping that we can reach the widest possible audience, and that 2021, 2020 can be an inflection point in one way, and in terms of just recognizing how deep of a hole we're in here, but maybe 2021 can be a different kind of inflection point in terms of really, pulling out a shovel, so to speak, and digging our way out, or not, but one can hope. So, with that, thanks for having me, and it's been good, and I'll take off here.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you very much for the great conversation. Appreciate both of you taking the time. Thank you. Everyone go to citylitbooks.com and buy the book. Good night.
Night.
Yep. Good night.